I mean, we want to unite this country around Team USA in the pride of our nation, without a doubt, right? We love our sport in this country. This is the only team we all agree on.
I'm Bob Safian, and I'm here with Sarah Hirshland, the CEO of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Sarah, it's great to have you back on the show.
Bob, it's great to be back.
So Paris is just around the corner. Are you excited? Are you nervous? I mean, you spend all year, multiple years to get to this point. What are you feeling?
All of it. All the things. I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling hopeful. We're prepared. And so it's easy when you're prepared to go into something to feel like now we're hopeful that we get a little luck on our side and this thing could be amazing.
The Olympic trials have recently finished up, Team USA selecting its members. You've been through that drill before, but I'm sure every time is different. Are there things that have been memorable to you about this year's trial season?
Always. And, I think the more each of us gets to know the people, the more invested you become in their success and their journey. And so, I've been in this role now 6 years, and many of these athletes have become friends and people I admire and people I understand even more about how difficult their journey is. So you get invested in their success for sure. And, as you said, it's always a little uncertain. And with trials, there are inevitably athletes who will make the team and achieve, for some, a first-time dream. For others, they're going back. And there will be those who don't. So it's the trials it's pretty gut-wrenching at times.
Are there any athletes who you had a particular engagement with during the trials, whether an unexpected surprise or an unexpected disappointment? Like, are there any things that you're thinking back on?
Sometimes the ones who don't make the team are the most gut-wrenching. And some super talented athletes may not make a team. We certainly saw that at the track and field trials in Eugene. We had an athlete who was extraordinary back in Tokyo at the games, who tripped in trials and won't be competing in that event here in Paris, despite the fact that arguably she's one of the most talented runners out there. So it happens. And it is what makes sport a little unpredictable. But it's also fun when you see someone like, the young 16-year-old, also from track and field, who will be the youngest male ever on the track and field side of things to make an Olympic team. And I spent a little bit of time with his parents, and they're as wide-eyed as he is. So it's fun. It's really fun when you get a chance to do that.
You just got back from the gymnastics trials. Obviously, the gymnastics community has dealt with a lot of adversity since the last trials. How did it feel to be there? Were there changes that you saw, that you felt?
We were in a place not too many years back where we were genuinely evaluating whether the U.S. Gymnastics Organization could regain the trust of its community. And this past weekend validated the answer to that unequivocally in my mind, which is they have done that. We saw, 15,000 people in the arena, 80% of them wearing some kind of red, white, and blue Team USA gymnastics apparel. And, it's a simple metric, but we don't wear logos of something that we don't believe in. It's really rewarding to know that we've learned, we've listened, we've evolved, and the community's back. And then we saw some extraordinary performances on the field, which further validates that the things happening in the offices are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I recently read a blurb from you where you were encouraging brands to do more and sponsor more Olympic athletes. Can you explain why you felt the need to say that?
Well, so many Olympic and Paralympic athletes are unknown to us, particularly in advance of the games, right? We don't see archery competitions every day on television. I'm always wanting to encourage people to open the aperture to the number of incredible athletes who are the best in the world at what they do, But just because we don't see them every day, it can be easy not to recognize that they're there. These are individuals who have achieved something of being the best at what they do that very few people ever achieve in their lifetime. And there's something to be learned from these individuals, and there's value to be garnered from their journeys. And the corporate community can and should leverage that in lots of ways. We tend to see a small handful of the ones we know the best showing up in TV commercials. And my push is broaden your aperture and recognize that, there's 800 athletes who are going to come to Paris who have achieved extraordinary things, and let's celebrate all of them.
For our listeners who are looking forward to the Paris Games, what should we be watching for? Who should we watch for?
I was teasing actually my uncle the other day, 346 events at the Paris Olympics. That doesn't even count the Paralympics. And the U.S., if history is any indication, will probably win somewhere north of 100 medals over 17 days. So to say, what should we watch for? I look at it and say, well, you should at least watch for the 100+ medals over 17 days. But that's a lot to squeeze in. Certainly, America expects an extraordinary track and field team, an extraordinary swimming team, an extraordinary gymnastics team. We love our basketball. We'll have 4 basketball teams this year, 2 5-on-5 and 2 3-on-3. So I would call out to those who are basketball fans in this country to say, pay special attention to the 3-on-3. It's going to be a ton of fun.
So I have to ask you about, I saw that Allison Schmidt and Michael Phelps were in Congress last week talking about drug testing and some Chinese swimmers testing positive for a performance-enhancing drug called, I think, TMZ without any repercussions. Like, how does that figure into this sort of sport integrity and how much, everybody can trust that this year's results are going to be fair?
Yeah, it's maddening to all of us, as you can imagine, to think that athletes could be going to Paris without the confidence that they're competing on a level playing field. And so we have to work hard, not just in the United States, but across the world, to improve a system that is in place, but is not operating, I would say, at full capacity. And we're talking about 206 different countries, all of whom are supposed to live up to the same standards. And so it's a difficult proposition.
There's a certain amount of trust, I guess, that it becomes part of it because you can't safeguard everything. You can't test for everything.
Well, you just used the big word, the big word of the day, maybe the big word of the decade, trust, right? And to what degree do we and can we trust? And who is it that we're relying on to trust? We're incredibly fortunate in the United States. We have an exceptional anti-doping system, and athletes in this country are held to an extraordinarily high standard. And we do have violations. It happens. It happens in the United States, and it happens in other places. The trick is to have a system that catches the bad actors and weeds them out of the system and doesn't let them play. And that's what we have to all count on.
As you're talking about the issue of trust, it made me think, like, what do you think this year's games mean for the United States, given where the brand of America is, like globally and domestically right now? Because the Olympics has an impact beyond just the athletes and the competition.
Yeah, it really does. And, I'm not sure I fully appreciated that 6 years ago when I took this role. It is in many ways, it's kind of a microcosm of a much bigger and broader geopolitical environment. And so we have to be conscious of all of that and celebrate the things that we should celebrate and be conscious and respectful of the places where we need to be a bit more humble, and we need to recognize where leadership is required, but how to do it in a way that brings others along.
Do you feel like one of the goals for you is that everyone in the world, including Americans, look at the United States differently as a result of the games? And if so, like, what would be different that you would want them to feel?
We want to unite this country around and behind Team USA in the pride of our nation, without a doubt. And I think, I say to people, anyone who will listen to me, this is the only team we can all agree on, right? We love our sport in this country. This is the only team we all agree on. And so it is an opportunity for people to come together and sort of have a lot of pride in being American and being part of this country and being part of the diversity of this country. This group of Team USA athletes represents the diversity of our country. I hope everyone in the country can see themselves in one of these athletes and be motivated and inspired by that. And at the same time, that the way we represent ourselves as a collective team, it reflects well on this country to others around the world. It reflects the excellence that we strive for as a country and have been able to achieve in many ways over decades, arguably hundreds of years, but at the same time respects that we understand the obligation that comes with that kind of excellence and leadership, and that we want to reach out and help others along the way.
It's always been tricky, I think, the relationship between the U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee and the athletes, because some athletes want to use the Olympic platform to advocate for things, for societal issues, for change, but they're also representing the country and not just themselves personally. And you're like the keeper of those guardrails. Like, how are you approaching that for Paris this time around?
Yes and no. I wouldn't call us a keeper of guardrails, but we're a facilitator of being a bridge between those things, right? Everyone is an individual, and we want to embrace and celebrate who each of these Team USA athletes is as an individual and what they care about and what matters to them, while at the same time demonstrating what it can mean to be very individualistic and part of a team at the same time. But we view it as our obligation to help athletes understand the ramifications of decisions they might be making. We're guests at the Olympic Games, just like every other country. We get an invitation, and that invitation comes and says, we'd like you to send a delegation of U.S. athletes to these games as our guest. And we, of course, accept that invitation. And when we accept that invitation, we also agree to be guests of that organization. And we have to abide by the rules and the framework that they set out. And there are ramifications if you don't. And so our job isn't to tell athletes what they can and can't do. Our job is to help them understand the ramifications of different decisions they might want to make, and so they can make informed decisions. And we also want to celebrate who they are as people and what matters to them in the avenues that we have to do that. And so I think we've given, over the past few years, and more so just in the last 6 months, and certainly this summer, we've given athletes more opportunity to have those platforms to talk about the things that matter to them. And I mean, the best example I can think of is we have a number of athlete mothers. And we've really done a lot to celebrate and let those women talk about what it means to be an athlete mother. In some ways, the beauty of it, and in many ways, the challenges that they see and the gaps that exist in society around what that is, and whether it's healthcare or, childcare, or stigmas around being an athlete mother. Those are stories we want and we encourage them to tell.
The next Olympics, 2028, will be in Los Angeles, when you get to host. Now I know that's still a ways off, but are there things that you're looking to learn from how the Paris Games unfold? Are there things you want to test? Like, how much do you use this as a lens for what you're going to do 4 years from now?
Enormously. We'll test a million things in Paris across every aspect of the organization. We don't get the luxury of a cycle of test and learns. We have these 4-year cycles. So for us, we try to cram a lot of newness into each games, and then we have to learn as much as we can, and we'll deploy that in Los Angeles. All of that is to say we'll learn a lot in Paris, but to have a games on home soil is a completely different animal. We'll use every minute of the next 4 years to get ourselves, and more importantly, the country, ready to really embrace what it will be to have these games on U.S. soil again.
As you're talking, it sounds like there's pressure around the Paris Games, for sure, for the athletes and for the team and for you. But compared to thinking about 2028, like, it's easier in some ways? Does it, like, when you look ahead to 2028, it's a little bit like of a lump in your throat, like, oh boy, we really got to hit the ball hard there?
100%. It's just more. I mean, you can go to a cocktail party at someone else's house and you still want to have a lovely time. You want to look nice. You want to be a good guest. That's a little bit different than having a cocktail party at your own house. How do we galvanize the support of the country? How are we growing our fan base here at home? What can we learn around how we're preparing athletes and teams for these games that's going to make us even better? And, we know that in Los Angeles, we'll have the largest delegation, the largest team the U.S. has ever fielded for a games. And you want to make sure that, if you're gonna show up to play, that you're prepared to win.
I wanted to ask you about the shifting NCAA financial model for college athletes. It's kind of a new complication. And I'm curious, as you look ahead to future games in 2028 or otherwise, like this paying of college athletes and the bridging of amateur and professional, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on the teams and on sport?
Broadly, the education-based system is what created the success of sport in this country. That started in elementary schools and high schools. And, we always grew up with the opportunity to learn and participate in sport. The college system accelerated that to the elite and created incredible opportunities for athletes. And that's been, it's the envy of the world. And that system is being challenged and threatened. To anyone who will listen, we are saying don't lose sight of the importance of broad-based sport on two things. Number one, Team USA and the development of our elite athletes in this country. And two, the health of youth sport. Because so many young people are participating in youth sport with the idea that one day that they might be a collegiate athlete. And if the collegiate system crumbles, youth sport will suffer and Team USA will suffer. And the development of human beings will suffer because sport is such an important part of the development of young people.
And what you're worried about crumbling, if I can just make sure I understand it, is that as dollars have to flow to certain kinds of athletes because that there won't be as much support for the broad group of collegiate athletes that aren't those essentially superstars?
The revenue from collegiate athletic departments is coming predominantly from football programs. And as those football players begin to share in that revenue stream, which, by the way, we support athletes sharing in the revenue, that the challenge will be that the incremental funds now get pulled away from supporting the fencing team and the rowing team and the baseball team. And so if what happens is you narrow what collegiate sports is from, a school that supports 20 sports down to a school that supports football, we're losing huge valuable programs for young people.
And when you have those discussions with the NCAA, with colleges, because the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee has always had a degree of influence in collegiate sports. When you have those conversations, what do you hear back?
Well, we're all working together to try to identify what the new model will look like. We have conversations with athletic directors at the institution level, with the conference commissioners, and with the NCAA, and create a transformed model that will allow for broad-based sport on campus, while at the same time providing greater benefits to those athletes who are contributing to the economic sort of machine that college football has become. And so we're all in conversations thinking about how you do this. And if I had the silver bullet, I'd probably be retired somewhere. It's a challenge, but it's doable. It's doable. It's just going to take some transition, and that'll be a little bit disruptive.
I had the CEO of the WNBA on this show several weeks back. One of the things I was asking her about was, like, you've got players who in college are playing in front of bigger crowds than they're going to play in front of in the pros. And if you can do, NIL deals, do your own personal deals, why go pro if college is, you can do as much money? It's just, things are moving around so dramatically.
In some ways, the sort of opening of the NIL aperture has been really good for some of these young athletes. And in other ways, it's been really bad. And so I think the one thing everybody agrees on is the status quo is not sustainable. And so what is the transition going to look like? We need to preserve the opportunity for athletes to generate earnings, undoubtedly, while at the same time ensuring that there is some sense of structure that provides for both competitive equity and parity. That's what makes sports interesting, but also protects the very athletes that we're trying to foster and develop.
So you've been at the helm of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee for 5 years. Your contract was just renewed through 2029. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
What's surprised you the most over the first 5 years?
Looking back was a time of reacting to the circumstances around us. We were sitting amidst a crisis of this reckoning around abuse in sport. We were sitting in a time that was going to require significant change and listening to the world outside, and we needed to be reacting to that. And that's one kind of leadership and one kind of sort of environment to operate in. Looking at the next 5 years, we are now really nicely positioned where we're calling the plays. I describe it to my team as we're playing offense now, and that it's a different kind of leadership. In some ways, it puts more pressure on you, but it's way more fun. It's quite likely here later this month that the IOC will award the United States the 2034 Winter Games back in Salt Lake City, which will put us at a place where from 2024 to 2034, we'll host both the Summer and Winter Games, and it will be a pretty extraordinary decade of sport. So we're looking at this and saying in the next 10 years, we have an opportunity to reset what this broad base of sport means in this country.
Funding is such a critical part of being able to do that, having the resources behind it. How much of the next 5 years is about thinking about the funding model, the business model differently? And where might you go with that?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, right? We have to grow. The 4-year period between now and LA will be a critical window for us to reinvent how we think about generating resources for Team USA, both philanthropic, which has become an increasingly significant part of our revenue, and also the business community on the commercial side. And that's a value exchange that, it's incumbent upon us to create great value for those businesses to be engaged and affiliated with us.
It's sort of taking advantage of these big moments when there are games, but also figuring out how to stay in the conversation and create value and create opportunity in those quieter periods.
That's exactly
too,
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
There's a 365-day-a-year journey that all of these athletes are on, and there are heat moments, and we have to think about sustaining that energy through all of it.
What will define success for Team USA in Paris?
Well, the number of medals is an easy one. I won't deny that we'll be paying close attention to that. We certainly will. We'll also look at the engagement of the American public across all the typical measures you would look at as a marketer. Certainly our partners at NBC will be watching viewership metrics as everybody would. There are digital metrics and social metrics. And then some of the, what I'll describe as maybe a little bit softer metrics, but we talked a lot about the integrity of sport and competition. And so, we'll evaluate the extent to which this experience for Team USA athletes feels fair. And does it feel inclusive, and does it feel safe? And are there measures around sort of that healthy sport culture that we can point to and say, is this going in the right direction as it relates to those things which matter?
Sarah, this has been great. Thank you so much for doing it.
It's my pleasure. And to you and all your listeners, go Team USA.